Maya Johnson took a deep breath as she walked up the wide marble steps of the county courthouse. The morning sun glinted off the building's tall windows, and people hurried past her in both directions. Some looked worried, others seemed bored. Maya checked her watch. She was 20 minutes early for her hearing. This wasn't how she usually spent her Tuesday mornings. As a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Maya was accustomed to being on the other side of the courtroom. But today, she was here for a simple traffic ticket, a minor speeding violation she'd received 3 weeks ago on her way to visit her mother in the hospital. Just get in, pay the fine, and get back to work, she muttered to herself as she passed through the security checkpoint. The guard barely glanced at her as she placed her purse on the conveyor belt. Maya had chosen to wear a simple navy blouse and black pants today instead of her usual formal courtroom attire. No need for the full suit when she was appearing as a regular citizen, she had thought. She pulled her curly hair back into a neat bun and wore minimal jewelry, just small pearl earrings her grandmother had given her when she graduated from law school. The traffic court was on the second floor, room 207. When Maya entered, she found the room already half filled with people waiting for their cases to be called. She found an empty spot on a wooden bench near the back and sat down, pulling out her phone to check her emails. "All rise," called the bailiff 40 minutes later, and everyone in the courtroom stood as Judge Walter Simmons entered. He was a tall man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He moved with the confidence of someone who had controlled this room for many years. "Be seated," he said without looking up, his voice deep and authoritative. Maya watched as the judge worked through the cases before hers. She noticed immediately that Judge Simmons' demeanor changed depending on who stood before him. With older white men, he was friendly and often reduced their fines. With younger people and minorities, his tone grew colder, his questions more pointed. Maya frowned, her prosecutor's mind automatically taking notes of the pattern. "Case number 47,892, Maya Johnson," called the clerk. Maya stood and made her way to the front of the courtroom. As she approached the bench, Judge Simmons finally looked up from his papers. His eyes narrowed slightly as they swept over her, and his mouth tightened into a thin line. "Ms. Johnson, you're charged with driving 42 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. How do you plead?" His voice was sharp, lacking the warmth he had shown to the previous defendant, an older white businessman. "I plead guilty, Your Honor, but I would like to explain the circumstances," Maya said calmly, maintaining direct eye contact with the judge. Judge Simmons cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Circumstances don't change the fact that you were speeding, Ms. Johnson." He emphasized her name in a way that made it sound like an accusation. "I understand that, Your Honor, but—" "Do you think the rules don't apply to you, Ms. Johnson?" The judge interrupted again, his voice rising slightly. People in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. The court clerk glanced up with a surprised look. Maya stood perfectly still, her face calm despite the heat rising in her chest. 10 years of courtroom experience had taught her to control her reactions, but she was stunned by the judge's tone. This wasn't normal procedure for a simple traffic violation. "No, Your Honor," she replied evenly. "I respect the law. I was simply hoping to provide context." Little did Judge Simmons know who exactly he was speaking to, or that this morning's exchange would soon turn his world upside down. Judge Simmons leaned forward in his high-backed chair, looking down at Maya through narrowed eyes. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom cast harsh shadows across his face. "Context," he repeated with a hint of mockery in his voice. "Please, enlighten us with your context, Ms. Johnson." Maya maintained her professional composure. "Yes, Your Honor, I was driving to the hospital because my mother had been admitted with chest pains. I was concerned about her condition and—" "So you decided that your emergency was more important than the safety of others on the road?" Judge Simmons interrupted again, his tone growing increasingly hostile. Maya noticed several heads in the courtroom turning to watch the exchange. A young white woman who had been caught going 45 in a 30 zone just minutes earlier had received a reduced fine and a friendly warning from the same judge. "No, Your Honor," Maya replied calmly. "I'm simply explaining that I wasn't driving recklessly. I made an error in judgment due to my concern, but I take full responsibility for speeding." The judge scoffed. "How generous of you to take responsibility for something caught on camera." He shuffled through her papers with obvious disdain. Do you have a history of traffic violations, Ms. Johnson? No, Your Honor. This is my first ticket in over 7 years. The judge raised his eyebrows in exaggerated disbelief. 7 years? That seems unlikely. At this, even the court clerk looked up with surprise. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably by the side of the room. Maya felt her heart beating faster, but years of courtroom experience helped her maintain her calm exterior. It's true, Your Honor. You're welcome to check my driving record, Maya said. A man sitting in the back row, a lawyer waiting for another case, was now watching the interaction with open interest, his pen poised over his notepad. Ms. Johnson, I don't appreciate your tone, the judge said sharply. This court doesn't have time for attitudes or excuses. Maya hadn't changed her tone at all, and she noticed a young law clerk behind the judge exchanged glances with the court reporter. I apologize if I gave that impression, Your Honor, Maya said. Judge Simmons studied her for a moment, then looked back at her paperwork. Standard fine for this violation is $120, but given your approach to these proceedings, I'm setting your fine at $300. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The fine was significantly higher than what others had received for similar or worse violations that morning. Your Honor, Maya began, that amount seems inconsistent with the fines imposed on similar cases today. The judge's face flushed with anger. Are you questioning my authority, Ms. Johnson? Perhaps you'd like to make it $400 instead? Maya knew when to hold her tongue. As a prosecutor, she had seen how some judges could become vindictive when challenged. No, Your Honor. I'll pay the $300. Wise choice, Judge Simmons said with a smirk. See the clerk for payment. Next case. As Maya turned to walk to the clerk's desk, she noticed several people in the courtroom watching her with sympathetic expressions. The court clerk avoided eye contact as she approached the desk. I need to process your payment, the clerk said quietly, taking Maya's paperwork. As she looked at the form, her eyes widened slightly. Ms. Johnson, Maya Johnson from the U.S. Attorney's Office? Yes, that's me, Maya confirmed. The clerk glanced nervously toward Judge Simmons, who was already hearing the next case. I've seen your name on federal cases, she whispered. You're that prosecutor who won the Ramirez trafficking case last month. Maya nodded, keeping her voice low. I am. The clerk looked uncomfortable as she processed Maya's payment. He shouldn't have treated you like that. He doesn't treat everyone that way. I noticed, Maya said simply, handing over her credit card. As she completed her payment, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her boss. Need you back for the Henderson briefing. How much longer? Maya glanced back at Judge Simmons, who was now smiling and joking with an older white defendant. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she typed her response. Just finished. On my way, and I think we need to talk about Judge Walter Simmons when I get back. Maya collected her receipt from the court clerk and tucked it into her purse. Her mind was already racing, analyzing the judge's behavior from both a personal and professional standpoint. As she turned to leave, the clerk called after her in a hushed voice. Ms. Johnson, you forgot to sign this form. Maya walked back to the desk. As she leaned down to sign the document, the clerk whispered, Judge Simmons has been doing this for years. Nobody says anything. Maya nodded slightly, her pen pausing on the paper. Thank you for telling me, she replied quietly. Just as she finished signing, a side door opened and a man in a well-tailored suit entered the courtroom. His face brightened when he spotted Maya. Maya Johnson, I thought that was you, he called out, his voice carrying across the room. Judge Simmons glanced up from his current case, annoyed at the interruption. The man approaching Maya was Richard Torres, the district attorney for the county. They had collaborated on several cross-jurisdiction cases over the years. Richard, good to see you, Maya said, extending her hand. What brings our star federal prosecutor to traffic court? Torres asked, grinning. Slumming it with us local folks today? His voice was loud enough that everyone in the courtroom could hear. Maya saw Judge Simmons freeze at his bench, his pen hovering over the papers in front of him. Federal prosecutor? The judge repeated, looking up sharply. The courtroom fell silent. The defendant standing before him was completely forgotten as Judge Simmons stared at Maya. Yes, Your Honor, Torres replied cheerfully. unaware of what had transpired earlier. Maya Johnson is one of the top prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office. She just won that big human trafficking case last month. Made national news. Judge Simmons' face paled visibly. Ms. Johnson, from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Maya turned to face the judge directly. Yes, Your Honor. That's correct. The judge swallowed hard, his previous confidence evaporating. I wasn't aware. No reason you would be, Your Honor, Maya replied evenly. Today I'm just a citizen handling a traffic violation like anyone else. The emphasis on like anyone else wasn't lost on those who had witnessed the earlier exchange. A few people in the gallery exchanged knowing looks. Tari's looked between Maya and the judge, sensing the tension. Did I interrupt something important? Not at all, Maya said. The judge was just imposing a $300 fine for my minor speeding violation, triple the standard amount. Tari's raised his eyebrows. $300? For a first offense? Judge Simmons cleared his throat nervously. There seems to be a misunderstanding. I believe the standard fine would be more appropriate in this case. He shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Clerk, please adjust Ms. Johnson's fine to $100. The clerk looked up in surprise. But you just said. $100 is the correct amount, the judge insisted, cutting her off. An oversight on my part. Maya stood perfectly still, her eyes never leaving the judge's face. No, Your Honor. I'll pay the $300 fine you originally imposed. The courtroom was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock seemed thunderous. That won't be necessary, the judge stammered. As I said, it was an oversight. Was it also an oversight when you gave reduced fines to 5 other defendants this morning, or when you spoke to them with respect while you interrupted and belittled me? Maya asked, her voice calm but firm. Judge Simmons' face flushed red. Ms. Johnson, I don't appreciate what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Your Honor. I'm stating facts that 20 witnesses in this courtroom observed. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The court reporter stared intently at her machine. Tari's looked at Maya with growing understanding, then turned a hard gaze toward the judge. Judge Simmons cleared his throat again. We should discuss this in my chambers. No need, Your Honor, Maya replied. I've paid my fine, but I do think we'll be discussing your pattern of behavior in a different setting very soon. Without waiting for a response, Maya turned and walked confidently toward the exit. As the heavy wooden doors closed behind her, the courtroom remained silent, the air thick with tension and the dawning realization that Judge Simmons had finally picked the wrong person to mistreat. Maya stepped out of the courthouse into the bright midday sun. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger that had been building inside her since her encounter with Judge Simmons. Her phone buzzed in her hand, another message from her office asking when she would return for the Henderson briefing. Instead of replying immediately, Maya sat down on a bench overlooking the courthouse plaza. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts. Maya, wait up. She turned to see Richard Torres hurrying down the courthouse steps toward her. That was something else in there, he said, sitting down beside her. I've known Walter Simmons for 15 years, but I've never seen him backpedal so fast. Maya smiled thinly. I'm guessing you don't spend much time in his traffic court. No, Torres admitted. Mostly felony cases. He studied her face. Was it really as bad as it seemed? Worse, Maya replied. You only caught the end of it. The way he spoke to me compared to the white defendants was educational. Torres shook his head. What are you going to do about it? Maya looked out across the plaza, watching people come and go from the courthouse. Some looked relieved, others defeated. She wondered how many of them had faced similar treatment from Judge Simmons over the years. I don't know yet, she answered honestly. After Torres left, Maya called her office to say she would be late. Then she dialed another number. Mom, how are you feeling today? Maya listened as her mother described her recovery from the heart scare that had led to Maya's speeding ticket in the first place. She didn't mention the incident with the judge. Later that evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop open. Her partner, David, was washing dishes nearby. So this judge had no idea who you were? David asked as Maya recounted the day's events. None, Maya replied. He just saw a black woman in casual clothes and decided I deserved different treatment. David dried his hands and sat across from her. Doesn't surprise me. Remember when we went house hunting and the realtor kept directing all the questions to me, even though you make twice my salary? Maya nodded. The memory was still fresh, even 3 years later. What bothers me most isn't how he treated me, Maya said slowly. It's thinking about all the people who don't have federal prosecutor as a shield. The ones who can't afford to pay unfair fines or who don't know how to challenge a biased judge. She opened her laptop and began typing. David watched her with a knowing look. You're going to report him, aren't you? I'm drafting a formal complaint to the Judicial Conduct Committee, Maya confirmed. But I need to be strategic about this. She thought about her own career path, the struggles she faced in law school as one of only 7 black women in her class, the times she'd been mistaken for a defendant or a court reporter rather than an attorney, the constant pressure to be twice as prepared as her white colleagues. If I make this about just me, it's easy to dismiss as one bad day or a misunderstanding, Maya explained. I need to show this as a pattern. David nodded. The clerk mentioned he's been doing this for years. Maya typed a few more notes. I'm going to request the court records for his traffic cases over the past year. Compare fines by race, gender, and age. The data will either support what I saw today or it won't. As she worked, Maya remembered the faces of people in the courtroom, their looks of surprise when they realized who she was, but also the resignation of those who had clearly seen this behavior before. You know this could get messy, David warned gently. Judges have a lot of power in this town. Maya looked up from her laptop, her expression resolute. So do federal prosecutors, and someone needs to stand up for the people who can't stand up for themselves. She returned to her typing, now with a renewed sense of purpose. What had happened today wasn't just about an unfair fine. It was about justice, about the system working equally for everyone, not just for those with titles or power. Besides, Maya added with a small smile, I think Judge Simmons has already realized he picked the wrong person to mess with. Maya arrived at her office earlier than usual the next morning. The federal building was quiet, with most of her colleagues not due to arrive for another hour. She preferred it this way. Peaceful morning hours were perfect for her most focused work. She set her coffee on her desk and opened her laptop. Before doing anything else, she created a new folder labeled Simmons Investigation. Then she began to write down everything she could remember from her experience in traffic court, documenting each detail while it was still fresh in her mind. Morning, superstar, called a voice from the doorway. Maya looked up to see her boss, Director Thomas Wilson, leaning against her doorframe. You're here early, she said, quickly saving her document. Wilson stepped into her office. Big day with the Henderson case. But I wanted to check in about that message you sent yesterday, something about Judge Simmons. Maya took a deep breath and told him the full story. Wilson's expression darkened as she described the judge's behavior. That doesn't surprise me, he said when she finished. I've heard whispers about Simmons for years, but no one's ever filed a formal complaint. I'm planning to, Maya said, gesturing to her notes. But I want to do this right. If I'm going to challenge a sitting judge, I need evidence beyond my personal experience. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. What's your plan? First, I need court records. I want to analyze his fines and sentencing patterns across different demographics. Consider it done, Wilson said. I'll call the court administrator myself. What else? Witness statements from people who were in the courtroom yesterday. And I want to talk to that clerk. She hinted that this is a regular pattern with Simmons. Wilson leaned forward. Maya, you know this could get complicated. Judges protect their own. Simmons has friends in high places. So do I, Maya replied with confidence, including you. Wilson smiled. True, but be careful. Document everything and keep me in the loop. After he left, Maya continued working on her strategy. By lunchtime, she had drafted a formal complaint to the Judicial Conduct Committee and created a plan for gathering evidence. That afternoon, Maya visited the courthouse again, this time in her full professional attire with her federal prosecutor credentials clearly visible. She met with the court administrator, a nervous-looking man named Jenkins. Ms. Johnson, I've already received calls about this matter, he said, fidgeting with a pen. From whom? Maya asked directly. Judge Simmons, for one, and 2 members of the Judicial Board. Maya wasn't surprised. Word travels fast. They suggested this might be overblown. Jenkins continued carefully. A simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with an apology. Is that what they're calling racial bias these days? A misunderstanding? Maya's voice remained calm, but her eyes were intense. Mr. Jenkins, I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because the law should work the same for everyone, regardless of their skin color or position. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. What exactly do you want from my office? Court records for all of Judge Simmons' traffic cases from the past 2 years. I want to see the demographics of defendants, charges, and the fines he imposed. That's thousands of cases, Jenkins protested. Then your staff better get started, Maya replied. I can submit a formal request through the Freedom of Information Act, or you can cooperate voluntarily, your choice. As she left the administrator's office, Maya noticed a young woman waiting by the elevator, the court clerk from yesterday. Ms. Johnson, can I talk to you? The clerk looked nervous. Not here. Maybe somewhere private? Maya nodded. Of course. What's your name? Lisa Martinez. And I have things you should know about Judge Simmons. Things I've been documenting for months. Maya felt a surge of hope. This was exactly what she needed. Someone on the inside with first-hand knowledge. As they walked toward the exit together, Maya knew the path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt certain that Judge Simmons would finally face consequences for his actions. 2 weeks had passed since Maya filed her formal complaint against Judge Simmons. She sat in a small conference room at the Judicial Conduct Committee headquarters, surrounded by stacks of documents and folders. Across the table sat Lisa Martinez, the court clerk who had become an unexpected ally. These numbers are even worse than I expected, Maya said, pushing a spreadsheet toward Lisa. The data told a disturbing story. Over the past 2 years, Judge Simmons had imposed fines on black defendants that were, on average, 67% higher than those given to white defendants for identical violations. The disparity was even more striking for black women. I told you it was bad, Lisa replied quietly. I started tracking the pattern 6 months ago when I noticed how differently he treated people. But seeing it all laid out like this, she shook her head. The door opened and in walked Judith Chen, the lead investigator for the Judicial Conduct Committee. Her expression was serious as she took a seat. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Martinez, thank you for your patience. The committee has reviewed your initial complaint and the preliminary data you provided. She paused, glancing down at her notes. I'll be direct. Some members wanted to dismiss this as insufficient evidence. Maya felt her heart sink, but Chen continued. However, the statistical analysis you presented was compelling enough that we decided to launch a full investigation. What does that mean exactly? Maya asked. It means we're going to review every case Judge Simmons has presided over in the past 3 years. We'll interview court staff, analyze his rulings, and speak with defendants. Chen looked directly at Lisa. Your testimony will be crucial, Ms. Martinez. Are you prepared for that? Lisa nodded, though Maya noticed her hands trembling slightly. I am. I've worked in that courtroom for 4 years. I've seen enough. You should know, Chen added, turning back to Maya, that Judge Simmons has hired prominent legal counsel. He's claiming you're pursuing this as revenge for your personal experience and that you're using your position as a federal prosecutor to wage a vendetta. Maya had expected this. The data speaks for itself, she said firmly. This isn't about me. If it were just my case, I wouldn't be here. The judge also claims he was having a particularly stressful day when you appeared in his court. Chen continued. He says his behavior was not representative of his normal judicial temperament. Lisa couldn't help but laugh. A stressful day that's lasted 4 years? Because I've watched him do this every single day. Over the next month, the investigation expanded. More court employees came forward, including 2 bailiffs and another clerk. Former defendants began sharing their experiences with Judge Simmons, many describing similar treatment to what Maya had encountered. The local press caught wind of the investigation. Maya arrived at work one morning to find reporters waiting outside the federal building. She declined to comment, following the advice of Director Wilson to let the investigation proceed without public statements that could be perceived as prejudicing the case. Judge Simmons, however, had no such reservations. He gave a lengthy interview to the city's largest newspaper, portraying himself as the victim of a witch hunt orchestrated by an overzealous federal prosecutor with a chip on her shoulder. The article included a statement from Judge Simmons that made Maya's blood boil. "I have treated every person in my courtroom with the same respect and fairness throughout my 20-year career. I don't see color. I see citizens who either follow the law or break it." But the evidence continued to mount against him. Computer analysis of court records revealed that the disparities in his courtroom extended beyond traffic cases to criminal sentencing, bail amounts, and even how he addressed defendants. "He can deny it all he wants," Maya said to Lisa as they prepared for the formal hearing. "The numbers don't lie, and neither do the dozens of witnesses we now have." As the day of the judicial conduct hearing approached, Maya received an unexpected phone call from Chen. "Ms. Johnson, you should know that we've completed our investigation," Chen told her. "The evidence of bias is overwhelming. Judge Simmons has been informed of our findings." "And?" Maya prompted. "And he's requesting a private meeting with you before the hearing. His lawyer says he wants to apologize." Maya considered this for a moment. "Tell them I'll see him at the hearing. This isn't about an apology to me. This is about justice for everyone who walked into his courtroom." The day of the judicial conduct hearing arrived with a buzz of tension throughout the legal community. The large hearing room was packed to capacity, with every seat filled and people standing along the walls. Reporters clustered near the entrance, notebooks and recorders ready. Maya sat at a long table facing the 7-member Judicial Conduct Committee. Lisa Martinez sat beside her, looking nervous but determined. On the other side of the room, Judge Walter Simmons sat with his attorney, a well-known defense lawyer named Harrison Wells. The committee chairperson, Judge Eleanor Ramirez, called the hearing to order. "Today we consider the complaint filed against Judge Walter Simmons regarding allegations of racial bias and discriminatory conduct in his courtroom," she announced. "We will hear testimony from both sides, review the evidence collected during our investigation, and determine what, if any, disciplinary action is appropriate." Maya was called to testify first. She walked to the witness chair, took her oath, and faced the committee with calm confidence. "Ms. Johnson, please describe what happened in Judge Simmons' courtroom that led to your complaint," Judge Ramirez instructed. Maya recounted her experience clearly and without emotion, sticking to the facts. She described the judge's tone, his interruptions, and the excessive fine compared to other defendants that day. When she finished, Wells stood for cross-examination. "Ms. Johnson, isn't it true that you were upset about receiving a ticket and went into that courtroom already angry?" he asked. "No, that's not true," Maya replied evenly. "And isn't it possible that you misinterpreted Judge Simmons' tone because of your own bias?" Maya looked directly at Wells. "I've appeared in hundreds of courtrooms over my career, Mr. Wells. I know the difference between normal judicial authority and discriminatory treatment." After Maya, Lisa took the stand, her voice growing stronger as she described the patterns she had witnessed daily in Judge Simmons' courtroom. "He speaks differently to people based on their race," she testified. "He cuts off black defendants when they try to explain themselves. He gives them higher fines. This isn't one bad day, it's how he operates." The committee then reviewed the statistical evidence. The lead investigator presented graphs showing the clear disparities in Judge Simmons' rulings across racial lines. The data was projected on a large screen, making the pattern unmistakable to everyone in the room. Finally, it was Judge Simmons' turn to testify. He had aged visibly since the investigation began, his face drawn and his hands slightly shaky. "I have served this community for 20 years, he began. "I have always tried to be fair and impartial. Yet the data shows consistent disparities in how you treat defendants of different races," Judge Ramirez pointed out. "Statistics can be manipulated," Simmons countered. "And what about the witness testimony? Are all these court employees manipulating their experiences too?" asked another committee member. Simmons struggled to answer. "I may have had unconscious tendencies in how I approached certain cases, but I never intentionally discriminated against anyone." The hearing lasted for nearly 6 hours. As it neared its end, Judge Ramirez asked if anyone had final statements. Maya stood. "This case isn't about me or my experience. It's about a pattern of injustice that has affected hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who came to court expecting fair treatment. If our justice system treats people differently based on their race, then it isn't justice at all. Judge Simmons spoke last, his voice subdued. I've served this court for my entire career. If I've made mistakes, they were not intentional. I ask for the opportunity to do better. The committee deliberated for 2 hours before returning with their decision. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, Judge Ramirez announced, "This committee finds that Judge Walter Simmons has demonstrated a pattern of bias and discriminatory conduct in his courtroom. Effective immediately, he is suspended from the bench for 6 months. Upon his return, he will be required to complete comprehensive bias training, work under supervision for 1 year, and undergo quarterly reviews of his case rulings." As the room erupted in murmurs, Maya caught Judge Simmons' eye across the room. For the first time, she saw something she hadn't expected: shame. The system wasn't perfect, Maya thought as she gathered her papers, but today, at least, it had worked. 2 years had passed since the hearing that changed Judge Walter Simmons' career and sent ripples through the county's judicial system. On a bright spring morning, Maya Johnson stood at a podium in the main lecture hall of State University Law School, facing a room full of eager law students. "The law is only as fair as the people who enforce it," Maya said, her voice carrying to the back of the packed hall. What happened in Judge Simmons' courtroom wasn't unique. It wasn't unusual. It was simply visible because someone was watching. Maya had been invited to speak to the third-year law students about bias in the judicial system. Her case against Judge Simmons had become required reading in legal ethics courses across the country. "When I walked into that courtroom 2 years ago, I was just another person with a traffic ticket," she continued. "The judge saw a black woman in casual clothes and made assumptions about who I was and how I should be treated." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Did you know when you filed the complaint that it would lead to such big changes in the court system?" Maya smiled. "Not at all. I just knew that if it happened to me, it was happening to others who didn't have my resources or platform to fight back." The changes had been significant. Following Judge Simmons' case, the state Supreme Court had ordered a review of judicial practices across all county courts. New rules required regular analysis of sentencing data to identify potential bias patterns. Mandatory training programs were implemented for all judges, focusing on implicit bias and fair treatment. "What happened to Judge Simmons after his suspension?" asked another student. "That's actually the most surprising part of this story," Maya replied. "Judge Simmons completed his suspension and training, and when he returned to the bench, he was a changed person." It was true. Against all expectations, Walter Simmons had embraced the opportunity to learn and grow. After his initial defensiveness faded, he had confronted his own biases with remarkable honesty. He requested to be assigned to the juvenile court, where he worked to ensure fair treatment for young offenders regardless of their background. "Last month, Judge Simmons asked me to meet with him," Maya told the students. "I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed." The meeting had taken place in a small coffee shop away from the courthouse. Simmons, looking older but somehow lighter, had thanked her. "You could have ended my career," he had told her. "Maybe I deserved that, but instead, you forced me to see something in myself that I had been denying for decades." In the lecture hall, a male student at the back raised his hand. "Do you think he really changed, or is he just saving face?" "Actions speak louder than words," Maya answered. Since returning to the bench, his rulings show no statistical disparities across racial lines. He started a mentoring program for minority law students. He speaks openly about his past biases. That looks like real change to me. As Maya concluded her lecture, she shared one final thought. "The most powerful lesson from this experience is that justice isn't automatic. It requires vigilance. It requires people willing to stand up when they see unfairness, even when it's uncomfortable or risky." After the talk, Lisa Martinez was waiting for Maya outside the lecture hall. No longer a court clerk, Lisa had been inspired to go to law school herself and was now in her first year. "Great speech," Lisa said, giving Maya a quick hug. "The students were hanging on your every word." "How are your classes going?" Maya asked as they walked together across the campus. "Challenging, but I'm where I belong," Lisa replied. "I keep thinking about all those people who faced Judge Simmons before we stopped him. Someone needed to stand up for them." Maya nodded. "That's what justice is all about. Not just following rules, but making sure the rules are applied equally to everyone. As they reached the parking lot, Maya's phone buzzed with a message. It was from the court administrator, informing her that the judicial reform measures she had helped design were being adopted by 3 neighboring counties. Maya smiled as she showed the message to Lisa. What had begun as one unfair traffic fine had grown into something much larger, a reminder that sometimes justice needed champions. And that change, though difficult, was possible when people refused to look away from injustice. Not bad for a day that started with a speeding ticket, Maya said, as they walked together into the bright afternoon sun.